and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's session of Measuring Instruments Regulations 2016, which CTSI is delivering in partnership with Fab Training. This session has been funded by the Office for Product Safety and Standards. And I would now like to hand you over to Ian Turner, who is your trainer for today's training. Thank you very much, and I hope you all enjoy the training.
So Measuring Instruments Regulations 2016, there are lots of things we need to think about the Measuring Instruments Regulations, and we need to understand, get the context that they effectively reflect what's called the Measuring Instruments Directive. Those of you that have been an inspector for a number of years will have been brought up on the Measuring Instruments Directive, and I think it's easier to understand how it works and the implications and nuances if you start from the end of the directive and then, if you will, learn the exceptions. So make sure that you're understanding that what we're talking about here today is the UK regulations, and clearly with Damien in the room and people doing the training as well, the other thing we need to grasp all the time is that there are effectively two sets of regulations. There's the Measuring Instruments Regulations 2016 as respects England, Scotland and Wales, and the Measuring Instruments Regulations 2016 as respects Northern Ireland. And they are different. And so you always need to remember those points. I think the mantra always I've given them when people who've done my training before is always just remember pretty much whatever sentence you're talking about for non-automatics or measuring instruments, just put in brackets except for Northern Ireland, because that's different. Why you need to understand that difference is, for those people doing the training, is that you're UK inspectors and you need to understand the legislation as respects the UK. So I hear quite regularly, why do I need to know this? Because it's only Scottish law, it's only England, Wales or Northern Ireland. The exam is for the UK inspectors, and I'm sure Damien will be happy to sort of get people over to Northern Ireland to work there with the exam. So by the end of this session, you will understand. Here we go. Structure and format of the Measuring Instruments Regulations 2016. Something that's very important, and some of you will know to an extent and some of you will know less, but it's very, very, very important to understand, is the responsibilities of the economic actors under the regulations. That is kind of the cornerstone, the bedrock, the foundation, call it what you will, of how these regulations, and if you're doing product safety and things like that as well, it's the same principles. It's what's referred to generically as the new approach, and that's how these regulations, we've got manufacturers, authorized representatives and all that kind of stuff. We'll go through that. Measuring instruments has got whole sets of different conformity assessment routes. If those of you that have done product safety will be fairly confident with sort of the self-declaration modules, if you will, modulate to those kind of things, and they're fairly easy to understand. Clearly the Measuring Instruments Regulations doesn't just do one or two modules, does it? No, it has about 10 of them eventually, and they're easy enough to understand, and we look at those and the nuances and the things that we have to do. And then I've spent some time, and the important point here is instrument types under the regulations. So what I've done here is tried to split out the difference between the instrument types that are under the Measuring Instruments Regulations and those that are under the let's call it the UK open bracket Northern Ireland regulations. And it's quite interesting that we've still got, at the end of this, remember we've got the Weights and Measures Act, and we've got section 17. So some of the stuff that's not under the Measuring Instruments Regulations is ultimately still under control. So nothing is not controlled. Apparently the information in these slides is provided by me on behalf of CTSI, and is not formal advice. There you have it. In case you didn't know, as a trading standards officer, important to emphasise, only a court of law can make the final decision. I bet that's news to you. Introduction, slide 2. We're going to look at 3 broad areas. One is the responsibilities of economic operators, and what's important for people that are trainees is the terminology. So the terminology is economic operator. That's the phraseology that's used. Sometimes you see the terminology economic actor is another term that's used, but it's important to understand that the whole structure for trading standards is based on this economic operators. And what we will find quite quickly is that the economic operators change. The same business can be different economic operators depending on the supply chains. So you might find different supply chains for the same company, giving them different responsibilities. And also you have to remember that there's extra little wibbles for movement of goods from GB to NI. So we've got these 4 economic operators, and then we've got some extra little nuances, wibbles, call them what you will, for Northern Ireland, because some of the legislation indirectly is affecting Northern Ireland. And we've got things like fulfilment houses. And if we want to understand the legislation fully, we've also got, bear with me, we've also got something called Decision 7's 2019-1020, which talks about economic operators in Northern Ireland. So some of that gets quite complicated. The second area we're going to look at is what we call the conformity assessment procedures. That's the important word. So those of you sitting the exam, that's the phraseology. It's generically referred to as the modules. And those of you that have either listened to me blather on before or talk about this before, never confuse these modules, A, 2, B, F, etc., with the modular approach to weighing and measuring. So never confuse the modules with conformity assessment. The modules as in load cells and things like that. So we've got module A2, plastic capacity serving measures. Module B, type examination. F is trading standards in the UK. And then D, and D is probably the most common one. I think in the British market, D is what people tend to use. Introduction number 3. We've got E1, quality assurance of the final inspection and testing. G, unit verification, not often used. It's not a common thing. And we do get H and H1. Conformity to type based on full quality assurance. That's quite clever, H1, and it's mostly aimed at things like electricity meters and water meters and things like that, things that have lots of design changes and you don't need to look at the different type approvals. It's worth understanding because we are responsible for water meters. And then we're going to look into instrument types that are covered. So not all of these are the responsibility of weights and measures authorities, but if you want a good understanding of the MID and how it works, it's worth having a brief look at them. And then, so the instrument types are broken down into schedules in the regulations. It's not easy to read because they've broken down the requirements for first placing on the market in the in-service into different sections. It's not been written for to be user friendly. Which is why I always think it's worth looking at MID. But when we look at the technical aspects, they are word for word the same as the MID. So in terms of practical stuff, that's the easiest way to go, is look to the directive and learn the exceptions. Questions so far? Thoughts? Is this news to people? New? Not new?
Recognising reassuringly familiar in places, which is good.
Excellent. That's just like Carling or whatever. Is it Carling or Stella? Reassuringly familiar.
Reassuringly refreshing or something. Yeah, something like that.
Something like that, isn't it? Yeah.
Along those lines, anyway. Yeah.
So what I've done on this slide is on the left-hand side, I've got what they call the annexes to the directive, and those numbers are useful to learn. I'm guessing those of you that have done weights and measures for a number of years have noticed that weights and measures people like to talk in numbers just to sort of overcomplicate things, in my opinion, but there we have it. So people talk about 001 or 002. So this slide is attempting to sort of throw some light on what people mean. And on the right hand side, I've written down the actual schedules. So if you actually want to go back and look at what they are, that's the schedules you'll find in the measuring instruments regulations. So MI001 is water meters. So you can look at MI001 of the MID or Schedule 1C of the regulations, and it's water meters. What you'll pick up quite quickly, well, maybe you won't, I don't know, is the MID covers water meters for domestic, light industrial and commercial. The UK regulations only cover it for domestic cold water meters. So that's an immediate thing where the UK government have decided to reduce the effect of the MID. MI002 covers gas meters. Schedule 1D of the regulations, nothing to do with us. MI003 is of some interest, covers active electrical energy meters. Where that's actually interesting now is obviously they're looking at reviewing the MID, and the UK government have got a consultation out at the moment. I don't know if anybody's read it, looked at it, on metering for cars, so car charging. So the MID has got something called what's called a targeted amendment. So they're introducing another annex for car charging, essentially, and they're talking about having indicators on phones, so you won't have the display on the car charger. It could be on your phone on an app. The UK government, for what it's worth, is clearly fixated with having it on the app. And so we need to think about what we're thinking about here is that weighing machines, petrol pumps and things like that, indicators. So at the moment, all of the MID largely says you've got to have a display, but clearly technically you don't have to have a display. You can go on your phone, you can go anywhere. But this might be an interesting point where we're beginning to think about a sort of a fundamental change in the way that we view our job, essentially, because the legislation doesn't deal with connectivity very well. MI004, for what it's worth, is heat meters. MI005 is measuring systems for the continuous and dynamic measurements of quantities of liquid other than water. So hidden inside of those words is petrol. So in the UK, MI005 covers petrol meters, those meters below 100 litres, and bulk fuel that above 100 litres attached to a lorry. It doesn't stretch into other areas, so it's literally very specific to that. I think the interesting thing not many people pick up is optics in pubs. Why is that not covered by Annex MI005? Because an optic in a pub isn't continuous and dynamic, it's discrete. So that will be the reason. It's a good exam question. Let me be warning to you. Why is an optic not covered by the MIR? Annex MI006 is automatic weighing instruments. Schedule 1G, and hidden inside that we've got 6 subcategories that we need to understand. And for those of you that are trainees, they come up regularly. Though I'm looking at Matthew, who's just done some check wires yesterday. Was it yesterday, you say? Those would have been, those would have, were they check wires or weigh price labellers?
Check wires.
Check wires.
Sorry, catch wires.
Catch wires. So that they will be under an Annex MI006.
Yeah.
And so that's come there. The thing about MI006 is the check wires. It's largely controlled by package goods regulations. So that's one of those things where there's a tie-up between various sets of regulations. And also remember things like automatic catch wires covered by things like machinery regulations, things like that. So you've all got sort of loads of things focused there. And MI 006, for the sake of sort of discussion and improvement, there's a lot of very, very clever stuff there with machine learning. And that's where some of the AI stuff is really coming to the fore now on catchwires. It's interesting. So under MI 006, there's machinery regulations talk about self-learning characteristics. So instruments with self-learning characteristics, and the EU machinery regulations as applied to Northern Ireland talk about self-learning characteristics, and the software, OML software documents talk about self-learning modules. So it's all sort of beginning to move forward. MI 007 we don't really think about is taximeters. MI 008 is material measures, so Schedule 1I of the regulations. So that's not measures that measure material. So that's the tape measures and glasses, pint glasses. And MI 0010 is exhaust gas analyzers. Interestingly, what I've missed out there, it should be MI 009, which is dimensional measuring instruments. So where that features in some of our work is airport baggage wires, the sizes, that sort of thing. And MI 009 is not in the measuring instruments regulations, but will still be covered by Section 17 of the Weights and Measures Act. But we talk about that later. So I'm hoping there might be some thoughts, feedback, question. That's what we're going to cover. Positives, negatives. Who's heard this before? I have said on a number of occasions, this only works if we have conversations.
Sorry, Ian. What did you
Go
say
on.
that MI 009 was covered by?
Do you want to put your screen on if you're talking, Claudia?
Sorry.
MI 009 is
Yeah.
dimensional measuring instruments.
Yeah.
So
And what
MI
did you say it was covered by? Because it's not covered by the regs.
So it's not covered by the regs, but will still be covered by the Weights and Measures Act.
And what section did you say, sorry?
Section 17. Anybody that uses weighing and measuring equipment for trade, it must be false and it must not be false and unjust.
Is that because is that including, you know, the Royal Mail square things where the letters go through?
That's a dimensional measuring instrument.
Yeah. So that's not covered.
The answer to the question is yes, but just to run through how we get to the yes is it's not covered by MIRs. But if you look at Section 92, do you remember I banged on endlessly about Section 92 definitions? You've got a definition of weights and measures equipment. So a dimensional measuring instrument will be weights and measures equipment. And if any weights and measures equipment is used for trade, it cannot be false or unjust.
Yeah, that's right. Is that why only the ruler part of the Royal Mail square thing is metrologically approved, like has the markings and stuff like that, but not the actual slots? Is that right?
So what you're looking at there is possibly a very old one. Have you got one that you've looked at in mind?
It was on the familiarization day. They had one there, and they said that the ruler was the only bit that had the markings on, and the rest of it isn't covered as such.
So that one,
I can't remember exactly.
No, that one that they've got, because they like to update their equipment regularly. So within the last 40 years. So that one has got a backwards epsilon on it. So that one isn't something that was covered by the old EEC regulations back in the 80s and 90s. So that one, that's the answer to that one is correct. But if you look at Section 92 of the Act, and I'll put it up on the screen in a minute if you want, it says any weights and measures equipment.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to have a look?
Only if everyone else is interested. If not, then I can look in my own time.
But if you look at the definition of weighing and measuring equipment,
Okay.
have you got the Act there?
No, I'm just making notes at the moment.
Okay. Anybody got it on the screen?
Yep.
You wanna-
Section 94, Ian.
Section 92, weighing and measuring equipment.
94, is it not?
Sorry, 94, yeah.
Weighing and measuring equipment means equipment for measuring in terms of length, area, volume, capacity, weight, or number, whether or not the equipment is constructed to give an indication of the measurement made or other information determined by reference to that measurement.
So your post office sizer would come under that.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's it's definitely weighing and measuring equipment. So then if it's in use for trade, which is section 7, you then go, can you just read out the beginning bit of section 17, Jim?
Section 17. If any person uses for trade or has in their possession for use for trade any weighing or measuring equipment which is false or unjust, he shall be guilty of an offence and the equipment shall be liable to be forfeited.
Yeah.
So the important point, the one where I think it's important, but your postal scales are the same. Your postal scales, your dimensioners are the same. Where the world has changed, if you will, is the baggage sizes.
Okay.
At the airport, so you get charged if your bag is outside a certain size.
Yeah.
And not charged. So that, in my view, that's weighing and measuring equipment as defined.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
And if it's not, if it's either A, false, or B, unjust. And they had an interesting one where they had the baggage sizes, and then I think, if I'm getting the story straight, they decided to reduce the sizes because that's what cheap airlines do, and they stuck some plates on the side to bring the baggage sizes in slightly, and then the plates became loose, so the plates were moving around, so you couldn't get your bag in. And so there's a classic to me, false and unjust.
Yeah.
So
these pieces of equipment aren't marked, then, are they? They're just
no, they're
known
not stamped
to be.
or anything, because they're not prescribed, or they're not caught by the MIR.
Okay.
But in my view, they're covered.
Yeah, I agree that they're covered.
Anybody else other thoughts on what we've covered so far?
Could I just ask, I can't remember the number, I think it was maybe number 6, the one you were saying about the optics. And I think you said because they're not continuous and not dynamic. Can I just double check? Continuous and dynamic, what does that mean in sort of layman's terms?
It doesn't
stop or change, kind of thing. Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. So
thanks.
if you think about a petrol pump, you press the nozzle, fuel comes out, and then you stop the nozzle, and the fuel stops. So it's a continuous measurement.
Yep. Yeah.
Whereas
perfect,
an optic will only measure a discrete amount.
Yep.
For people of a certain age, you used to get paraffin meters, which had these glass chambers that would fill up, and then you could empty. But you have to be quite old to remember those. Next, any other questions? Perfect. So now we're going to move on to responsibilities of economic operators. And this is crucial stuff, to be fair. So if you haven't got any questions, I don't believe you. So the legislation will apply when the product is first placed on the market and all the way through the supply chain. So what you need to think about is that there's legislation for a new product. You have legislation that covers the entire life cycle of the product. And then for the European Union and the UK, there's also environmental legislation. So when you stick it in the bin, there's still legislation, WEEE and recycling legislation. So the entire supply chain of our product is covered. And so what we need to think about here is that the bulk of the MIR that we're talking about here will cover first placing on the market. So the first time it's used. I think the easiest way to think about this is if we think more broadly, and people who have done product safety, any product at some point it will come off the production line. And if you talk about televisions, you can talk about toys, you can talk about a Barbie doll or a food mixer or whatever. It will be finished at some point and ready for supply. And that's the point where it's first placed on the market. And the points we need to take about for first placing on the market is more complicated for weighing equipment specifically. But so there are two things we need to think about. One is weighing equipment specifically will be subject to gravity. So if I'm thinking about a doll or a telly, it's placed on the market when it's stuck in a box labelled dispatch, when it's got all its markings on, and I can plug it in and I can use my telly. If I'm thinking about a weighing machine, a lot of them will be called what's called location specific. So I can't use a weighing machine. Petrol pump is another good example. I can't use those until they're ready to be plugged into the ground. So for weighing and measuring specifically, we've also got another concept, which is putting into service or putting into use. We need to think about those. And the other thing we need to think about is repairs. Clearly, you don't invariably repair your Barbie doll. Unfortunately, in 2025, you don't really repair your telly, do you? You just generally buy another one. Whereas weighing machines, petrol pumps are always repaired. So we have that whole notion of requalification as well. And then third point about first placing on the market, we've got a lot of problems, a lot of challenges about online sales. So this is one of our first issues we get for UK legislation is in Northern Ireland, we've got this whole notion about fulfilment service providers. So the legislation about fulfilment service providers applies in Northern Ireland. And then we've now got, somebody's going to correct me here, the digital market, what's it called? DD? Somebody help me out here. The
Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act.
That's introducing online marketplaces. Am I in the right place there?
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's for whatever reason, we've now got a problem where we have fulfilment service providers apply in Northern Ireland, and then we've got this online market. Has anybody looked at this yet in any detail? Does it work? Is it got any value? Question?
I haven't looked at it, so.
I had the training on it, but not had to use it yet in terms of work.
Yeah,
I've not looked.
Yeah, but it's there. So we're now attempting to solve this problem of online sales differently. So we do have this divergence, if you will. So once we've understood first placing on the market, three things to think about that. Just to repeat myself, for weighing and measuring for MID is gravity. One is placing on the market and or putting into service, and the third one is online sales. Becomes increasingly challenging, online sales. I've done some work recently on online sales and weighing, and there's no importers marked, so we've got no idea who's bringing them in, so it's quite challenging. So what we need to think about now is a hierarchy. So at the top of this hierarchy we have manufacturers, and then further down we have different economic operators with different responsibilities. So the manufacturer is the pinnacle. That's the one we need to think about. They're the responsibilities. They're the people that mean it's going to comply. And then further we go down and we look at these in more details. We have importers, distributors, we've got a little subset on the side called authorised representatives. And then in Northern Ireland, we've got the fulfilment service providers. Third bullet point, legislation applies to all forms of selling. A product offered in the catalogue by means of electronic commerce must comply with union harmonisation legislation. So for union harmonisation legislation, read UK harmonisation UK legislation. When the catalogue or website directs its offer to the market and includes an ordering and shipping system. So this is clearly labelled Amazon, eBay. That's clearly where the legislation is trying to go. Obviously, Amazon and eBay tend to sort of say nothing to do with me, gov. We're like a shop window. We don't own it. Legislation applies to newly manufactured, but also to used and second-hand products imported from third countries. And a product which has been subject to import, this is the last bullet point, is important. A product which has been subject to important changes or overhauls aiming to modify its original performance will be considered a new product. So in weights and measures land, that last bullet point is probably the most important and the most difficult, because if we think about automatic weighers, if we think about petrol pumps, they will invariably be connected to other products. We don't have in 2025 standalone automatic weighing machines. We don't have standalone petrol pumps. We don't really have standalone anything. Changing the subject completely, connective. No, it's not changing the subject. I went to a one-day festival thingy at the weekend. Enjoyed it very much. Automatic beer dispensers. Never seen one of those before. I was the only man at the entire auditorium, stadium, taking photographs of beer dispensers. So you just tapped your card on it, pulled out a cardboard pint glass, CE marked, thank goodness, put it on, and it just filled automatically. Not a jolly barman or barwoman in sight. So there's an interesting thing, isn't it? And that reason I tell you that story is we've clearly got something quite interesting there about data moving around. So where we're going with that last bullet point, we need to think about, firstly, we need to think about connectivity and POSes. So I might sell a petrol pump. My petrol pump is then connected to a POS system. At a later date, my petrol pump is connected to a card reader. Technically now, you've got data going to back offices, check weighing systems now, automatic weighing systems, the data goes up to the cloud. So hidden inside that there is you've got a whole concept of it's placed on the market, then it's changed, so it needs to be initially qualified again, then it's changed and it needs to be initially qualified again because we have a different instrument coming all the way through. Also hidden in that bullet point is rebadging. So I may buy, I'm in Northern Ireland, there's a supplier of check weighing systems, and they buy them from a well-known German manufacturer. So to all intents and purposes, I look at this check weighing system and it's got Berserber written all over it. But the company has modified the performance, purpose or type by sticking their own name on it. So suddenly the concept, if you understand this, you're getting the concept, they've become the manufacturer. So all of a sudden they are now the manufacturer and they have to take on all of those responsibilities. So although from a trading standards point of view, when you go and look at it, it's a Berserber check wire or a so-and-so weighbridge to all intents and purposes. But that last bullet point is quite important about understanding connectivity, quite important about understanding rebadging, because there are big markets in both. Questions, thoughts?
I've had one recently, Ian. The company shall remain anonymous, where they've changed EPOS on an LFMI, and they're adamant that there's no real qualification required. So that's ongoing at the moment.
That's a really good example. So stop me if I haven't heard the story, But LFMI, people happy with that phrase? Petrol pump, liquid fuel measuring instrument. So they've got an EPOS, a POS connected to it. They've disconnected it and put another one on. Yes.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Upgrade sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they're vehemently claiming it doesn't need either an initial re-verification or a requalification.
Yes.
Is that really?
Yes.
Nice.
And
that clearly hidden inside that bullet point is the answer. And it's not that, to me, that wouldn't be even one of those subtle, maybe not.
Yeah.
That probably needs initially qualifying, in my opinion, if it's different software.
I think the advice, the assured advice that's been sent from the primary authorities even more interesting. But as I say, I'll probably start to say too much.
Going to tell me the assured advice is in the local area to the trainer, aren't you? I know what you're going to say.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. Yes. Just thought that was that, as you say, it was.
It's a good example.
Fit into that, yeah.
It's a good example. The other example, our colleague and good friend Stephen Macaulay, up in, where is he? He's
Renfrewshire.
He goes and is the permanent bane in the side of Glasgow Airport, quite correctly. So they buy a base. They then connect the base to a POS system, and then he quite rightly says you've got to re-verify it. So there's all sorts of things like that in the marketplace which are wrong. And the point to take out for that, to me, is it's, as well as the fascination for people like us on legal metrology law, it's commercial, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, if you're not re-verifying it, you're working at a lower cost base, aren't you? And it's just got to be, I think it's very black and white. Other questions or thoughts?
Sorry, and just on that point, in terms of the issue, is it just a fee issue, or is there enforcement in terms of non-compliance with them not recognizing?
You will also find that the connection, the items connected to it are not approved. So there is a fee issue, a fairness in the market, but you will also, so the problem on things like POSs is that the markets are different. So the weighing market or the petrol market is fairly confident on what its legislative requirements are. But you will then find, let's call it an airport, goes and gets the POSs off a software house, and they have no idea what's doing. I'll give you the example that came across my desk quite interestingly, and many people would have heard of this story, I think, because most people in this room are Scottish. Is an experienced trading standards officer went in to look at a weighbridge, and after many years training and experience, he noticed that there was a question of compliance, because there were two displays. One said 10 tons, one said 10,020 kilos. So the displays were different. And so the issue was that they connected the indicator to an unapproved POS. That person who'd done the POS system decided to put some kind of setting on it to take into account what they referred to as rain or water, that sort of thing. And the weight that was being used was the one that was different, had come through the POS. And I thought the really intriguing point of it is when the inspector said, not sure that's legal, they removed it remotely. So they didn't come to the premises to remove it. They just dialed in and then removed the extra 20 kilos. So besides the fee question, there is a compliance question. There is a company not in your area, Damien, that does a lot of POS boxes, and there was a big thing recently about compliance, and it was the software didn't talk to each other in the end, so there was no security on the software. So It is both. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, spot on, yeah.
Yeah. Other thoughts or questions? And sorry, can I just finish the point with Damien? The other thing now is the value in these products is in the software. So at the end of the day, if you're looking at a network system, the value isn't necessarily in the weighing function. The value is in the compliance of what you're doing with the data. So it's kind of a change from our world, if you will. Other thoughts or questions? No. I'm looking for some questions from people who are just starting this as well, because all the questions we've had so far have been quite sophisticated. Responsibilities of economic operators, slide 2, if it could get more exciting. So these are the ones we've talked about briefly. We have manufacturer, so that's the fundamental building block. We've got this subset of authorised representative. So the point about an authorised representative, many people confuse that. It's not a dealer. So it's not somebody who is selling the product. An authorised representative is a person appointed on behalf of the manufacturer to carry out certain specified functions. So you might find 10 dealers, but only one of them is an authorised representative, and there has to be written instructions. Less important these days because it worked when in the EU, when you may have a company based in Scotland that then got a contract in Greece, and so to do the work they could either have to send the engineer from Scotland to Greece, or they could appoint an authorised representative in that country and they could do the work on behalf of them. Manufacturer and importer have become increasingly important. I've answered emails already on this to weighing companies this morning, because obviously since we left the EU, goods coming from France into the UK, and most importantly for the weighing and measuring industry, Ireland is part of the EU. Pretty much all companies in GB will do business in the Republic of Ireland. So you have to remember that goods travelling from GB to ROI are imported. And the only people that have made good money out of that will be Dublin solicitors who have set up companies, registered addresses in big black doors somewhere in Dublin for Ian Turner Scales Europe Limited, for essentially carrying on servicing the market in ROI. So that's important. So this morning I've had to do some emails on bringing scales from France into England, and obviously now it's CE marked, it's got a declaration of conformity, so it's completely fine, but you still need to have the name and address of the importer or on accompanying document. So that's a change. And something quite nuanced is that if I'm moving goods from England, Scotland and Wales to Northern Ireland, I need an economic actor, a legal entity in Northern Ireland, to bring the goods into Northern Ireland. I don't think it's particularly enforced, Damien. Would you have a view?
No, it's, as you remember, it's something we looked at when MSC came on a few years ago, but I don't think it has raised any issues to this point. So
I think there was an interesting one came across my desk, and that was very funny because it was a government contract, and so it was an English company and a Northern Irish company tendering for the contract. The English company won the contract, and the Northern Irish company clearly got pretty annoyed about this because they'd had the contract previously for many years. And then when I looked at it in detail, there was no economic operator in Northern Ireland for the English company. And I said, well, legally.
And have they done anything about it?
I said it's not my job. I'm not poking a stick at it. Sort of. There's more hidden in that than we wish to necessarily poke a stick at. But it's one of those, the law of unintended consequences in Brexit. Really, it definitely says you need an economic operator in NI. please could you show me the evidence of your economic operator? There wasn't one.
Right.
Doesn't comply with the law, does it?
I'll maybe chat to you after, see who they are.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you later. But it was, and unfortunately, in my other life, I work for a trade association. So both companies were in the trade association. So I clearly wasn't going to poke a stick at it. I would have been off somebody's Christmas card list either way.
Yeah.
But I just thought that's the kind of thing that we do need to think about. So if you're advising companies as a trading standards officer, although unless Damien's going to wildly disagree, I'm not sure it's enforced massively. You've got the advice. You have to give that advice. You can't professionally say it's fine just to move this scale from Cornwall to Fermanagh, unless you have an economic operator. I don't think they'll do anything about it, or if they send it through Ireland first, it will be fine. But it's just one of those things. Importer creates a lot of problems. Distributor is the next one down the line. So that is the one that the supply chain. So if I go from an import in Turner Scales and then I sell it to 10 other people, they become distributors. We have end user. So that's the person that uses it. There's a little bit of ambiguity around end users for industrial supplies. So if I'm selling my scale to a cheese factory in Republic of Ireland, are they the end user? And if they're the end user, no legislation applies to the end user. So there's something around there. And this is all hidden inside something called the Decision 768. For those of you that want to become students of these things, it's an important document. If you read Decision 768, and something I've banged on about for so many years, everybody who's been into training before would have had the Blue Guide rammed into their brains. The Blue Guide is I think it's a well-written document. It explains most of these concepts quite well. It's not something you read from page 1 to page 400 or however many pages it is, but it's a really good reference book. You just use it as a PDF and search it. Thoughts, questions? Is this new to people? I'm looking for people who this is clearly new to, because they've said I've never done this before. So unfortunately,
I've not done
Amy,
this before, but I'm recognising the economic operators from the safety stuff.
as I say, unfortunately, you're the only one on my screen, Amy, that said I'm new to this. So I'm pointing at you. But,
That's all right.
yeah.
So yeah, I recognise this in the sort of decision in that. So I'm following on a wee bit.
Yeah. It's important to get it in your head and understand it. It's not one of those. I loathe to talk of my own job like this, tedious weights and measures discussions. It's something that is fundamental to ensuring that the legislation is enforced properly. So responsibilities of economic operators. So I love this. The manufacturer is any natural or legal person who manufactures, happy with that, a product. So that in my head, I've got legal person is a limited company, a natural person is a sole trader. Although you kind of ponder on the idea of what an unnatural person is for the purposes of this, but and the most important point, going back to what we were talking about earlier, placing on the market and all that stuff, we've also got this extra bit in here. Or has the product designed or manufactured and place it in his market under his own name or trademark. So that's fundamental, because it supports the bit we were talking about earlier about placing on the market and changing instruments. So it's another argument that saying taking the fascia off and sticking a different fascia on makes you the manufacturer. So all of a sudden there's a whole trade. If we think about pint glasses, this is where this comes really into play, is there's a massive market in pint glasses and people buy what are called blanks. So a small business in Hertfordshire can get a contract for a festival and they want it all labelled up with this festival, that sporting match, this, the other. And they then do the conformity assessment. They put the CE marks or the UKCA marks on it. That makes them the manufacturer. Some of these things are quite interesting. They're even like publicity houses, marketing houses. So they're not even weighing companies. It's a company that does. I had one the other day about Wimbledon. Somebody wanted to do carafes with the Wimbledon logos on. So they bought a load of empty carafes and then just emboss them, do the checks. And the point is, they're the manufacturer. And we need to understand that, because that's quite a big responsibility. And even if they're not the manufacturer, they're an importer. So it might be a company that hasn't even, that's a real back bedroom kind of business, capacity serving measures, and they're the importer. You get it a lot with non-automatic weighing machines for sort of cheap counter machines. The Chinese scale company will produce a machine and then they'll just rebadge it for 100 different manufacturers. So the point I've got here is the most important point is a manufacturer does not need to be the assembler. The entire process can be subcontracted. And it's something I think professionally, with weighing and measuring, we're still looking for a factory. We're still looking for a production line. We're still looking for something that's building something, and it doesn't have to be that. The manufacturer has the ultimate responsibility for the conformity of the product to all applicable legislation. And this is the link to do, is responsible for signing the Declaration of Conformity. Declaration of Conformity is that public statement that it complies. That's the point. And when you do market surveillance, the first document you go and look at, can I see the Declaration of Conformity? So you have to drill home to manufacturers, some of them quite small businesses that will know nothing about weighing or measuring, that when you sign that, you're the person going to be prosecuted. When the trading standards come round, it's you that will be asked. You're the signing of the declaration. And to illustrate the importance of that point is this story I've just rated about the POS systems. It's just how it worked out at the airport. That was funny. So the weighing company supplied the weighing machine. The POS company then supplied a load of POS boxes. The airport just connected them up, and an inspector, and this wasn't in Glasgow, this was somewhere else, just came along and said, none of them are compliant. I'll give you 24 hours to sort the problem out. And the question came, who's going to sign the Declaration of Conformity? Because clearly the airport didn't really want to sign the Declaration of Conformity because they knew nothing about weighing and measuring. The POS company didn't because they knew nothing much about weighing and measuring. And nobly, the weighing company stepped in and charged the airport 5 times the normal fee to verify them and sign the Declaration of Conformity. So the point of that little story is the Declaration of Conformity is your pin. That's the plug that makes all of this work. And the last bullet point on this slide.
Can I ask a question there? Sorry, Ian. You're talking about the Declaration of Conformity for that machine in the airport. So is that because the weighing bit of it and the POS, when they're connected together, that becomes one instrument then, is it? And
I'm literally going to repeat the answer because yes is the answer, but where it becomes more difficult to identify why people get confused is there's a time thing. So the weighing scale company will have a Declaration of Conformity for the weighing scale.
Yeah.
So the weighing scale is placed on the market as a weighing scale.
Yeah.
I also have a POS box that will have a Declaration of Conformity because it needs to comply with EMC, with low voltage, all of those kind of things. So I've got 2 things that have got declarations of conformity, hopefully. Quite often you find the POS doesn't have a Declaration of Conformity. But as soon as I connect a wire between the 2, I have a 3rd instrument.
Yeah.
And that needs a Declaration of Conformity.
Fine. Yeah.
And the point we need to understand with some of this more sophisticated stuff is that the 2 modules, 3 modules, 4 modules may not be in the same place. They don't have to be connected by wires. But we are still dealing with one weighing or one measuring instrument. Does that answer the question there?
It does, yes, thank you.
Yeah. Other thoughts or questions on that one? No. So the last 2 bullet points, and this is a little hobby horse of mine, so you have to bear with me. Manufacturer has 2 main responsibilities. The actual article is Article 6 in the NAWI, Article 7 in the mid, I think. So 2 main things, and all we as a profession do is focus on the first one generally. We don't focus on the second one at all. Ensure the technical compliance of the instrument, compliance with essential requirements using a harmonised standard. So we spend hours and hours and hours working out how to test NAWIs, checking for markings, checking for calibration of weights, blah, 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 blah. And most inspectors are either brilliant down to adequate, but they've got a grasp of it. They know what they should do, even if they don't do it very well. The second one is the thing we don't really need to spend much time enforcing, market surveillance, is follow the correct conformity assessment procedures. They're legal obligations. I have to ensure the instrument complies with essential requirements and use the correct conformity assessment procedures to get it there. So if I have an instrument that hasn't had, back to our airport wires, a proper Module D process or a Module F process, both parts have got correct certification, but the entire instrument compliant doesn't have the correct certification, I have a non-compliant instrument. And it's as non-compliant as if it didn't weigh correctly. And the reason that's important is it's the distortion of the market. It's trading standards issues. What we're dealing with here is a cost base, and some companies working at different cost bases. So that's why both of those are important. Questions or thoughts? This is important. So I'm looking for people who are new to this to poke a stick at this, or people that are not new to it to ask the questions that the people that are new to it aren't asking.
Sorry if this is really obvious, Ian, but how do you know if they followed the correct modules? Is there like specific paperwork, like what would you do to make sure that they followed B then D?
So a good question, because what it's tying up, your question is tying up is the stuff that you've clearly learned quite well and know quite well to work out how. So what we're looking at here is market surveillance questions. How would I know this? So I need a B and a D. Yeah. So at the first instance, we go to the markings. If the instrument has been completely, properly, correctly informed. Let's talk about the airport pods. It's clearly the thing we're talking about. So has it got a B? The type approval will be marked on the side of the instrument.
Oh yeah, that's the certificate number.
Yeah, so I could go and get the certificate, and I could stand there with the certificate and say, does that comply with that? So my first market surveillance check, if you will, is it marked with the type approval? Yes, it is. Does it comply with the type approval? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
And sometimes you see TAC and then TEC. Are they the same thing or are they completely different?
No. Can I store that one next, and I'll just finish this and then
go
back to that one. So the second point is we want to know whether there's a Module D. Have they done a verification? Clearly, what we're looking for there is an approved body or a notified body number.
Oh, okay, right. It's as simple as that then. And you just obviously double check that exists.
So that's your first level of market surveillance. But the next thing, if we're talking about connectivity, which is important for petrol pumps, which is important for automatic weighers, we need to look at the declaration of conformity. Because if we think about the base, so the base has been placed on the market, the weighing bit's been placed on the market, it's going to have a Module B and it's going to have an approved body number on it. But that Module B and that approved body number apply to that base. We don't know whether it's been verified for the base connected to the POS.
Okay, yep.
You with me?
Yep, I'm with you.
So we then need a declaration of conformity, don't we? And the declaration of conformity will list, or should list, 15 kilogram scale, serial number, blah, 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 verified on the 3rd of June.
Yeah.
And then you can begin to work out, actually, I know that was connected to that 6 months later. So
and it will also say whether it's allowed to be connected.
So the type approval will tell you if it's allowed to be connected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the type approval will say can be connected to any approved POS, possibly, or can be connected to the following POSes. And the next kind of question you want to think about is, has that been verified by a module D or a module F? And that's a question of kind of investigation, isn't it? You're as good as me, but it's asking the questions of when did you buy that and when was the POS connected? And as soon as you can kind of ask those questions, you can actually begin to see they're on different dates, aren't they? Well, does that answer the question?
Yes, that makes it a lot clearer.
Declaration of conformity is your obvious document, because declaration of conformity should list what has been declared. You'll also quite often find bits missing on the declaration of conformity. Second question, techs and tax. So they're the same. Tech was before 2014. So tax, was before 2014. Applies to 2014 certificates. A tech was after 2014. Because they decided to change it because it was important to get some more 3-letter acronyms to confuse everybody. But they're the same. Yeah, they're the same. Other questions?
Excellent. Thank you very much.
That's all right. Other questions, thoughts?
Is tech type examination certificate?
Tech is type examination. TAC is type approval.
Okay.
Now I'm going to wait for somebody to ask the next question. Otherwise, I'll ask it of myself.
What's the difference?
It's just so techs and tax is just the date, how old it is, but you will also find TCs, PCs, and ECs, evaluation certificate, test certificates, and part certificates, sometimes marked, and those are certificates for different modules. So they're not the legal test. They're a modular certificate, and we're not going to talk about modules particularly today. But if you're really interested, even if you're not really interested, it's WELMEC 8.4 talks about the modular approach. Responsibilities of economic operators, importers. So the importer is a natural legal person established in GB who places a product from a third country on the GB market. So the issue here is clearly, before we left the EU, a third country was America or Bolivia or Malaysia. A third country now is France or Ireland or Spain. And so where that becomes quite challenging is most of the European weighing market is German. And so a lot of the scales coming in are either from Germany or from China. So lots of companies are now importers where they weren't previously. Most important point is that the importer must be established in the GB. So the manufacturer does not have to be in GB. Manufacturer can be in China, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, wherever. But the importer must be in GB. So what we're going to see is builds on the responsibility of the manufacturer. And they will also need to indicate the name, registered trade name or registered trademark on the instrument or until 2027 on accompanying documents. When I asked whether an accompanying document was the box, it was. So it can be invoice, anything. You don't actually have to have it marked on there. Questions? That one's complicated because it creates lots of problems that some companies will buy in things as an importer, and the same warehouse may get the same equipment that's been rebranded, and then they're becoming the manufacturer. So it might be the same things on the shelf. This is an interesting.
What's your view on that? What's your view on this, Ian? So another one recently had a distributor, an EPOS company distributing Avery Berkel multi-interval NAWIs, which hadn't been module DRF verified, but weren't passing on that information to the customer at the other side to say that that part of the part had to be completed. The reason I'm asking is because Regulation 28 of the NAWI regs has got the duty for distributors not to make non-conforming NAWIs made available.
Yeah, no.
However, there's no such offence within the regulations to say if they do put non-conforming products on the market, there's no consequence for it.
I'm going to guess, and this isn't my field of strength, and I'm going to use old language here. It's possibly a CPR, isn't it? BPR, possibly a BPR. It's clearly not professional, and it would just be a case of time. Tell me they weren't weighing Federation members, for God's sake.
No, they weren't. No.
It's a case of tying down where the offence is.
As I say, it's more just because the NAWI regs have got the distributor obligations in it, but then if that's breached, there's no such offence exists or that I can find within the regs. So as I say,
I couldn't answer the question off the top of my head.
The short answer is myself and a colleague went and Module F verified it anyway, so it's fine. It's the instrument's compliant now, but as I say, the distributor of the NAWI and the EPOS didn't pass on the that information to the customer. A
similar scenario I've come across on more than one occasion is they haven't been told it's not been calibrated for gravity.
Right.
So it's a very similar. It's a stage 1 verification, and there's your problem with like fulfillment service providers. This was a very large online company that when I kind of dug around a bit, they knew it should be compensated for gravity, but just didn't bother telling anybody. But clearly, you then bought them, and these were balances, so they were going to be wrong. And when you tested them in situ, they were all wrong. So it's a case of nailing the offence, I would say. But yeah, it's clearly not right, and depressingly unsurprising. Other thoughts there? Responsibilities of economic operators, fulfillment service providers. Products offered online are often stored in fulfillment houses, stored to guarantee their swift delivery to consumers. Amazon and eBay. So we've got this interesting thing, the regulation 2019-1020, and we've got this definition covers a commercial activity that includes at least 2 of the following: warehousing, packaging, addressing and dispatching without having ownership of the product. So applicable in Northern Ireland, but not applicable in GB. I think it's interesting because it's only the way the world's moving, isn't it? Until we nail online service providers and work out how we can control those, we've just got such a hole below the waterline on a lot of this stuff that it's almost impossible. Do you want to add anything, Damien?
Other than it's something I know you've been mentioning about it's a project should take on. I think it's something we have on our forward work plan this year. I know NSAI colleagues are saying that people are thinking they're buying equipment that's suitable, but it's not. They just get everything online, and no doubt there's God knows countless how many measuring instruments in Northern Ireland in operation. So we do market surveillance, as you know.
Yeah.
And I think where we're looking at currently, the compliance seems to be high. We probably need to look and focus on those areas where the compliance may not be quite as high. So
I think the issue for that is, and I've been involved in a European market surveillance project for the last year or so as the consultant, is, I mean, ultimately I'm agreeing with you, it's where you look. If you go onto the Avery Waytronics website or the Avery Preserver, whatever, it doesn't matter, I choose those names randomly, you may find non-compliance, but it will be relatively minor and they will be very happy to rectify it if you draw it to their attention. You don't need to go far to just see these scales with pictures of fruit and veg all over them, and price computing instruments with the clause that says only for domestic use. And you think, really? A 15 kilo price computing instrument for my domestic? I don't think so. So those are all over the place. Literally.
You remember last year we were doing quite a lot on packaged goods, and Judith and Charlene were saying that there was a lot of non-compliance. And conscious non-compliance from traders who were basically saying, well, trading standards don't do weights and measures anymore, so buy whatever scale you want off Amazon, eBay, and sure no one will know the difference. So there were a lot of equipment that was weighing accurately, but hadn't got the property conformity. So
and that, I'll just swap another story with you and then just go back a couple of slides to enforce the point. The one that came to me the other day was a scale that was CEM 25 with the NMO number on it.
Right.
So clearly the NMO's been shut for 4 years. So they were just printing these things out with the NMO number on it.
Right.
And it's either fraud or it's either fraud or negligence, one of the two, isn't it? And
yeah, probably fraud. Yeah.
Yeah. And just to emphasize the point, if we go back to this one here, so although I go to my friendly jolly butcher in Belfast who's bought it off eBay, and you'll stick a kilo on it and it weighs a kilo, it hasn't had any of the conformity assessment procedures. And that's the point. And quite often I've played with these things forever, these 50-30 quid scales, and it's the drift. If you leave 3 kilos on it for 20 minutes, it then gives you a completely different weight. And it is temperature compensation, things like that. And it's sort of, it's sort of, I tell you, even funny basic stuff. One I bought once, 35 quid delivered. It was a GPSR thing at the end of the, amongst other things. You could run your finger along the edge of the pan or lift the pan off and it cut your finger because the metal was so sharp. And it was just a silly thing that you never think, do you? You've got to be able to stick stuff on it without hurting yourself. Last of these, distributor. Distributor is a natural legal person in the supply chain other than the manufacturer or importer who makes a product available on the market. Specific obligations. Distributors are a third category of economic operators as a subject. So the thing about, there's a kind of a tie-up with distributors and online operators. Radio spares, companies like that, they will sell you scales. A lot of kitchen companies that do kitchenware will sell you scales. There's lots and lots of companies that do stuff for shops, aren't there, that will sell you scales. So they're all attacked under this point. Last one before we take a break. We've got this extra one, authorised representative. A manufacturer established may appoint a representative to GB to act on their behalf. Defined set of responsibilities that an authorised representative can carry out. Quite often for weights and measures law, it's clearly the verification. That's why they're being appointed. They can keep the declaration of conformity, and an authorised representative is also important, must meet both sets of obligations. So the importer can't verify things unless they are appointed unless they become a manufacturer or are appointed as an authorised representative. So questions before we have a coffee break?
Is this that thing where it's that mandate? Is that the same thing?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So conformity assessment routes under the MIR. So we've got these whole sets of modules, and as we've talked about earlier, they're important. That's how we place it on the market. And those of you that have done the training I've done over the years, you would have seen that schematic that talks about CE or UKCA, module B followed by D or F. But there are lots of different modules, and under the MIR, we need to think about some of these, make sure we're aware of them. So we've got this simple module A2. You can take it at face value. Is it good? Is it bad? Separate set of questions. It's pretty rudimentary, I think, and my contact with it doesn't fill me full of great confidence. Internal production control plus supervised product checks at random intervals. You can almost sort of see hidden in there the problems, can't you? It talks about internal production control. It doesn't talk about certified production control. It talks about internal production control and random intervals. Leaves me nervous, the notion of random intervals for checks. I can randomly check them every 10 years, can't I? The manufacturer must ensure the conformity of the product to all of the relevant requirements. So the random checks can be carried out by either a notified body or an in-house accredited body. So you've got these two situations, and it's capacity serving measures. Funny enough, something like this, little aluminium cups. So they'll make these things, and if you look at them when they're made, they're all quite simple, to be honest with you. Looking at thimble measures, a bit of tube, you cut the tube up, you put a base in it. You make the first one, you can make the following 10,000 pretty accurately. So they have to take checks. So if they've got an in-house certified body, accredited body, they can do those checks. Otherwise, the notified body or approved body can come in and do it. It's used a lot. Berry Trading Standards made good money out of it. They had about 80 clients at one point doing module A2. And you'll only see it in the capacity serving measure industry.
I think, Ian, sorry to interrupt, I think that's now, Buddy have now stepped away from that.
Yeah, they have. I can tell you factually they have. I know they have. But you still see quite a lot of glasses. Is it 0846, I think?
Yeah, 0846. So it's a whole thing all about the cardboard cups and Buddy having given it the inspector's thumb, and now they've stepped back from it.
I don't want to give any impression I look at the approved body or notified body number on glasses that I'm drinking out of, but yeah, you don't see so much of them now. Yeah. But there are about half a dozen suppliers now doing it. UKMB do it. NSAI don't do any, I don't think, for A2. SGS did some. Claudia.
Hello, I had a question a bit separate to this. I went to a local fete in my village and came across, I don't know if you can see these glasses in Benidorm, and it's got all 3 markings on it.
Nice.
Is that allowed? I wondered, because I'm sad like that.
It's interesting. I'm proud of you, Claudia. I'm proud of you that you were on a Sunday afternoon having a pint and you thought, I wonder if that's compliant. Can everybody see that? Just so if we describe it, we've got a CE UKNI and
a UKCA.
So on 2 levels, it's not compliant. Is that it should say UKCA or CE followed by the M mark followed by the approved body number. So the CE UKNI is the mark there for glasses that are manufactured in GB for export to NI. So if it's going to be fully compliant, the CE UKNI mark should be at the end. It should read UKCA M approved body number CE mark CE UKNI.
Oh, so it is allowed to have all three on there though.
So it's only two. So there's only two marks there.
Yeah, it's got UKCA, it's got UKNI and the CE.
So no, what you've got there is a CE UKNI.
Oh, that's just one. Right, I'm with you.
That's one.
Okay.
Yeah. There are many questions that stem from the CE UKNI. But that's what that mark is. And I tell you what you've just demonstrated there. One of the major questions that stem from the CE UKNI is misleading. So if you think about it, if you start drilling down and down and down, for NI, you had a CE UKNI mark, which should be to European harmonised standards.
Mm-hmm.
For UKCA, you would have it to designated standards.
Yeah.
So they're completely different things. So where that became really complicated is if somebody wanted to put a CE UKNI mark on for a scale, you would have to have an EU type approval done in the UK, done in GB, and you would then have to have a UKCA approval. And the other thing that bothers me about it is who owns the intellectual property for the CE mark. That's the European Commission. And so the British government just said, we're going to have a CE UKNI mark. And sort of until I said, are you sure? You can't just use it, can you? So in answer to your question, good question, it's fine. You're not going to shut it down because they've got the markings in the wrong order.
My question was more, are you allowed to have both on the same?
You are definitely allowed to have dual marking, but virtually nobody gets it right.
Okay.
Because you have to have two sets of complete sets of marks. Would Damien's colleagues run into a bar in central Belfast or central Derry and seize all the pubs because the markings were in the wrong order? Unlikely.
No.
But in exam land, no, it's not right.
Okay.
Does that help? Other questions on A2? Module B, type approval, type examination. And so the phrase you'll find in the blue guide is something called design phase. So what you have to think about is that the design of the instrument is covered under Module B. The placing on the market is covered under Module D. So Module B involves you sending off your instrument to the type examination, the notified body, approved body. They'll carry out lots of super expensive tests, temperature tests, voltage spike tests, EMC tests, all sorts of things, anechoic chambers. I think it's interesting if you've been around. Anybody else been around a notified body doing these tests? I think it's interesting. Not many people do. And you just take it for granted, don't you? It's a scale. It only retails 150 quid. And the level of rigor that it gets sent to is amazing. So the problem is it's very expensive. A standard 15 kilo Nawi, you're looking at probably 15 grand for a type approval. Somebody spoke to me the other day for about a type approval for a rail wire, 100,000 euro for a type approval for a rail wire. Type approval for a check wire, 50,000 euro, 60,000 euro. So it's a lot of money. And that's why people get very precious about it. It spends a lot of time doing it. So it's always followed by another module. So module B doesn't sit on its own. You can't be placed on the market unless there is another module that follows it. And what you're looking for is type examinations, like I think Claudia asked earlier, type examination certificates, type approval certificates. That's the document that comes out. If you're going to get in, if you're doing the exam or you're going to get into weights and measures, it's worth getting familiar with these. There are probably half a dozen suppliers across Europe. They all come, they make them in different styles. worth working out how you get them, and I've become familiar with them just because if you're doing market surveillance or you're doing your job properly, you need to at least be confident with them and understand what they're trying to tell us. People, any questions? Looked at type approvals, counterfeit type approvals. Be wary of counterfeit type approvals. They exist. I've got about 3 or 4 of them on my computer where somebody's just made it up. So I think that's quite interesting. Module D is really the important one for us. So if we don't have any questions from this, I will be disappointed. So module D covers the production phase, and it will be, under most circumstances, it will be followed by module B. It will follow module B. The manufacturer, and there's the words, the manufacturer operates a manufacturing part and inspection of the final product of a quality assurance system. So the whole thing is based on ISO 9000. It's based on quality assurance. So it's not just about sticking weights on it and checking it's accurate. It covers all of those headings in ISO 9001. People familiar, I'm hoping, or at least know what ISO 9001 is. I'm looking for somebody to nod or shake their head. So that's the module. There's WellMec guides on it. If you look, I think it's WellMec 8.8 possibly. Talks about module D and ISO 9001. So if you're looking at it, how it works, they will be audited. So the manufacturer will be audited once a year by the notified body or approved body, and they will go through the entire quality system, looking at quality objectives, management review, internal audits, all of those things, as well as the obvious calibration of weights and things like that. It's a system that works quite well. I think the problems sit on the quality or attitude of the auditors. Some auditors are one extreme and are very, very over scrupulous. Some auditors are less extreme, and may engage in sort of leisurely drive-bys, shall we say. I'm making no comment because I do a lot of module D auditing. And I think if we can iron, there's the problem there. I think in GB, there's a problem of supply. There's I think there's only 2 companies doing it, and unfortunately the auditor for one of them has just recently passed away. So you've got a problem now of no auditors. They've got no auditors to do it. So I think it's a problem. It's what we come to know as self-verification, and it's for those of us who are older, it's been around for years and years and years, but it's module D. I think people had experience of it, come into contact with it. Views or feedback?
Asking, can you give us some examples?
I mean, at the end of the day, in the UK, pretty much every weighing company or petrol company now works off module D. So you go through from all the weighing companies, Avery Weightronics, Avery Burkle, Herbert's, Zerba. They're all off. They all use module D because they're doing hundreds of verifications a year, and so they couldn't possibly now work with trading standards. But then if you work down, so Damien's on the screen, you've got Globeway in Northern Ireland, they're module D. But also you think it goes all over, originally it went all over Europe. So Northern Ireland is an interesting question because it's still partially in the single market. So you can have a module D company from Spain could come and place instruments on the market in Northern Ireland. And that's literally the whole point about it. It's all about the single market. Then you've got smaller companies. I'm just looking up and down who's on there. Brash in Glasgow. That's all done with module D. Pracia Molan.
I meant more the D1.
Oh, sorry, D1.
Are you talking like common form instruments?
Yeah. What men of a certain age, Jim, would call common form. Right. So okay. the actual definition is no electronic or electromechanical parts. So in however many years, the only example I've seen of D1 would be some very old dial machines. So it was some really odd. It was odd. Why somebody bought them, I don't know. 150 kilo dial machines. I think it was still not. I can't remember what it was used for, but it's still not common. It's
the only
still
common
not.
form machine that I've come across, which I tested for my portfolio, was one of those. Is it Roberval or
Roberval?
That's the one.
Heavyweight machines.
Must remember, I'm clocking this knowledge, Claudia. There is a small story here. Roberval. So it's an old type of machine with parallelograms, essentially. And
knife edges, bearings.
Yeah, but David, Jim's brother, David, or Gavin's father, Roberval was a person and a town. So he was and it's just as you drive up the motorway north of Paris, is the Roberval services and the Roberval. And if you go into the town, in the middle of the roundabout, they've got a big Roberval machine. And I remember David sending me this picture saying, "Look what I found." He'd driven off the motorway to find a picture of it. So no, Roberval. That's a common form machine. But remember, this is only going to apply to things in use for trade.
Yeah.
So sweet shops still kind of use those kind of machines. You know, those retro ones, I imagine.
But
they still like to use. I think.
But if that's what they're weighing out, if it's in use for trade, it would have to be subject to either D or D1. Are you looking at those kind of Annie's sweet shop, old time sweet shop sites?
Yeah, I think they still use them, don't they? Those kind of machines.
Most of them aren't stamped, from my experience.
Yeah.
Because there's no market in it.
No.
At the end of the day, you have to think it's all about a market, isn't it? If you want a Module D1 machine, somebody's going to have on their Module D certificate that machine. Yeah. And so a company is going to have to make the investment to be audited on it, blah, 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 blah. And most of those cheap sweet shop places, it's just off the internet.
Yeah. And they're not even in the right unit, are they? They're normally in pounds. Like the one that I looked at was, the capacity was £7 or something.
Yeah.
So it's not even.
I'm hoping you got slightly cross. I'm hoping you got slightly irritated and thought that's the kind of thing I should put a stop to. Yeah, no, they're not right, are they? You don't need a degree in advanced legal metrology to see a old scale that's marked up in pounds isn't.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I've spent 40 years doing this, and I've only ever seen one instrument that was going to be done under D1. Because you can buy a digital scale for 100 quid, can't you? 150 quid, legal digital scale. Where did I go? The Ironbridge Museum. So how can you do it? They insisted on having this ridiculous old thing that was from looked like it was from the 1840s, but then they had a digital scale next to it. So does that help answer what D1's about, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. It was more just a kind of practical.
It's
example of instruments.
I've come across them also, but then again, they're not in use for trade is the issue. In chicken packers and chicken sheds. So for weighing chickens, so the farmer weighs his chickens before they go on the lorry, and because you've got no power, so you can't run an electronic scale in your chicken shed because there was no plugs on it. So we bought a load of the old spring balances. It's that sort of scenario. Any other thoughts on D&D1? It's important. Anybody thought about looking at this as an inspector? actually asking to see certificates and quality systems and audit schedules. Because if we go back to the initial side, it's a legal obligation. If you're not audited, it's not compliant. If you don't have all of the technical files, it's not compliant. E1, quality assurance for the final product inspection and testing. So the point you've got to draw out there is that D1 is manufacturing part and inspection, so that covers all of it. E1 is assurance of the final product. Doesn't matter how you make it, I'm going to do the quality assurance of the testing at the end. It's aimed for capacity serving measures, so it's owned a huge factory. So if you think about A2, that can be relatively small suppliers. This is a massive factory churning out capacity serving measures by the million. They have a lab at the end of the production line, and they've got a quality assured production process there. And that would be module E1. So I've done quite a few module E1 audits over the years. And it's not difficult. You test your measures gravimetrically, so you know your density, you weigh it and do some calculations, and then you'll know your volumes. Anybody come across E1? F is trading standards. Conformity type based on product verification. So you'll find B plus F. Manufacturer ensures compliance of the products to the approved type, and then they'll turn up on your door and say, please, can you do the last bit of the process, the verification bit of the process? So the point there for trading standards is that you need to get all of the paperwork. So they'll turn up with a petrol pump, let's call it a petrol pump for module F. And if you're going to initially conformity assess it, you need to see the declaration of conformity. You need to see the type approval. You can see this and this and this and this. And then you make the decision, if you will, to lay another certificate on the top to say we've done F, and it can now be placed on the market. I think it's an important thing still, although it doesn't involve huge numbers. You've still got two problems essentially. One is geographical. If you're trying to get instruments verified in the Isle of Arran, it's too expensive for companies to send engineers up there to do. So there's a place there for module F. And the other issue where module F still is important is, so and keep up if you've got this, we're making headway. For module D, a manufacturer will have certain type approval. So if we think about the weighbridge market, there are three main companies: Waitron, Precium Molan and Avery Weitronics, and they will only be approved to verify their equipment. They're not approved to verify everybody else's equipment. So quite often these contracts may change hands, and a quarry may go from Avery Weitronics to Precium Molan or whatever, and then they can't verify it. So that's where module F will come in. So then you can then get it done by them. So it's called, the notion is encapsulated in the phrase a verifier of last resort. I think if trading standards step out of this market, it just won't be done, will it? And then you go to Crispin, who we were talking about earlier. He makes good money out of doing module F, so he runs around the country doing module F verifications for everybody, so he's quite good, and he's filled that space in the market. Claudia?
I had a good example of this. I went out with David, Sandy, a few of us, and we went and did some beer meters. So we tested 36, and I think 2 of them weren't accurate, but we managed to seal the rest of them, and that was under type approval as well. So that was really interesting.
Yeah, so there's an example that they should have been done by a B. They should have been done under section 11, I guess, as a beer meter.
Yeah.
But then the trading standards filled that space. I think that's the way that's the way it works. The supermarket scale is a similar principle, that the contracts swap around and the space is filled by module F. And the other thing with module F is the big heavy industry. So discontinuous totalizers and things like that. You go to Crispin again, so nobody's got any call to stamp endless gravimetric fillers. So the market will probably have 3 or 4 people across the country that can do it, and then they can step in and do those. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions on F? That's trading standards. And I live many professional lives, and I think it's important for trading standards to do. I think for trading standards as well, the point about it is there's a credibility gap, isn't there? Also, if you don't do it, in as much as the legislation gives you the power to reject equipment, but all you'll get from manufacturers is pushback in saying, if you can't verify it, what right have you got in terms of competency to reject it? So I think there's lots of stuff tied up in that which are important. One slide on the excitement of G&H. There are other modules in the MIR but are little used. Unit verification, that's generally, it can be used for massive great things that there's only going to be one of. H is conformity based on full quality assurance. So the manufacturer operates a full quality assurance system and ensure the conformity legislative requirements. H1 is important because it includes this notion of design examination. So what you'll see is that design examination is filling the space of type approval. So I can produce technical files, and then the notified body would agree to technical changes to the technical file. It's very, very useful for instruments that you're making lots of changes to regularly. I think H1 will become increasingly important actually with software and machine learning and things like that. So if you're changing software, what you don't really want is to have to go back and get a completely new type approval. What you do want is an ability to change it quite quickly, and H1 gives you that facility. So instruments under the Measuring Instruments Regulations, Annex 001, water meters. Now the bizarre thing is, I'm going to take £1 off everybody the next time I hear we don't have water meters in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland. Tough.
Little Englanders.
Sorry?
Little Englanders.
Little Englanders, but you're speaking to the man that, as a trainee in Bedfordshire,
spent your time doing them.
I spent all my time, for the first 2 or 3 years, we had the country's only water meter manufacturer, and I just spent all my time verifying water meters. So you'll be listening to me, all right? So under the MIR, clearly, I think they're only under the legislation in England, which is odd because Welsh Water, I know Welsh Water use them, but I don't quite understand why they bought all of these water meters. Well, partly because it rains all the time in Wales, but it's I remember getting involved in Module D on water meters for Welsh Water. So we have a harmonised standard, it's EN 14.15.4. We have a normative document, IMLR 49. People happy with what those phrases mean? Harmonised standard, normative document. I'm looking for a little thumbs up or a thumbs down. Yeah.
I've heard harmonised standard, but I don't think I've heard normative document before.
So a harmonised standard is, still is a European document which gives you, and you can write this down and highlight it, something called the presumption of conformity. So if I make my water meter to a harmonised standard, it will be presumed to be compliant with the essential requirements. Clearly, because it's only in England that it's used, I wouldn't worry too much about the harmonised standard on water meters, but the one you do need to know a lot about is EN 45501, which is the harmonised standard for non-automatic weighing instruments. a normative document is pretty much the same thing in principle, but it's produced by the IML, International Metrology. So there's these whole sets of normative documents, and they give you the presumption of conformity. Interestingly, water meters, massive exemption. They tried to combine the R49 and the 14154, and we get this international standard, ISO 4064. Most water meters are made to 4064 now. So that's the one, if you ever want to think about water meters, that's the one you want to think about, is 4064. Manufacturers are mostly using B plus D or H1. There was up to about last year, there was a manufacturer still in the UK making them. And when you think they're doing sort of 1 million a month, so it's big old business, water meters. Normally done as B and D, some of them are done as H1. So the annex creates 4 flow rates, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So think about it in terms of all weighing and measuring equipment. There's generally 4 categories of accuracy. Sometimes they're called 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes they're called 0.2, 0.5, 1 and 2. Water meters, it's those. Minimum flow rate will be your dripping tap. Transitional flow rate will be the point where it goes from the minimum flow rate to the normal flow rate. 3 is the bulk of it, and then 4 is if you overload it. And the way it works, and you can see at the bottom of this slide, you've got ratios. So when you start looking at it, it's all connected to flow diagrams and things like that. And they have something called a turn down ratio. So the higher the turn down, the lower the turn down ratio, the smaller these ratios, the more accurate your meter. So compliance with the standard requires tests at 1, 2 and 3, and there's your allowable errors, so 5% to 2%. And there you see there we've got the gap 3% if it's warmer. So if you've got a warm water meter rather than a cold water meter, and you have a leak test at 1.6 bar. Anybody looked at water meters ever? They're interesting. We used to do loads of them. I used to go and do complaints and things like that. We had a little water meter testing kit for testing them, and I spent more than a happy hour sort of laying face down on somebody's drive trying to read water meters.
Do they generate many complaints, Ian, from users?
This is all
obviously Scotland. It's not
still done on the rates, isn't it?
Something that we encounter.
They generated more complaints than you would think. Yes, when we did it in the days when trading standards officers did work, I was probably doing 2 a month. Yeah, more than you would think. But the other side of the coin, and I think it's a broader point, is why do we have legal metrology? None of them were really. One of them was justified. And the annoying thing, the one that was justified was some big posh house that had an automatic watering system, so they could easily afford the water.
Yeah.
I think the funniest one was actually me. So we lived in this old cottage for a bit, and behind it was a big old country house thing, and they'd connected all of the pipe work to their garden off our water meter. So the water meter was fine. It's just that we were paying for watering this huge garden plus our house. And nowadays the technology has improved. I think last time I looked at these in any detail, the chambers are moulded, and the issue is the accuracy of the moulding, and they were getting them accurate and within tolerance, not just the metrological tolerance, but the actual engineering tolerance, to 99.8. Yeah, and you're thinking, wow. And that was sort of thousandths of a millimeter they were getting it accurate to. And so in the end, if you've got that, and there's an interesting point of the story, it's about assessing the quality assurance.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you're making the measuring chamber to that level of accuracy, Putting water through it is kind of irrelevant. It's going to pass, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
so I
Ian,
guess go on.
can you explain that? You know where it says allowable errors?
Yeah.
5%.
So below
Q2,
Q2.
2%. So is that Q1 would be 5%?
So Q1
and
to
Q3?
Q2
Yeah.
is 5%. So that's a slow flow rate. So Q1 to Q2, imagine a dripping tap.
Yeah.
Yeah. Q2 to Q3 is running your bath or running your sink or running your washing machine.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a leak test at 1 point. Yeah. So it's 2% Q2 and above. So we've done Annex MY001 water meters. So now we've got Annex MY005 measuring systems for meters other than water. And we've got two different types of meter that this annex applies to. So remember, this is only UK legislation here. So the MID will apply to all meters other than water. So we've got liquid fuel measuring instruments, to all intents and purposes, petrol pumps, and bulk fuel measuring instruments, so tankers to effectively. So I'm guessing people are happy with there, and the kind of the criteria is 100 litres, above 100 litres and it's on a lorry is a bulk fuel measuring instrument, below 100 litres, not on a lorry, is liquid fuel. And also remember, for whatever reason, those that fill aircraft are exempted. You would have thought filling aircraft might be a really important one, but seemingly not. There are no harmonised standards. So we have a normative document, which is OML R117. So some of the important things to think about with Annex MY005 is the annex relates to a measuring system, not just a meter part of it. So it's everything incorporated in that system. So that's the pipework, the POSs, card readers, and as they get more sophisticated, even more and more and more and more. So we've got to remember that it's the approval must all include all elements. So if we're doing module F or module D on that, we're looking at the entire system, not just the pump. Remote software and control boxes, they're all going to be controlled. So the tolerances are terribly difficult to complicate. I don't know if anybody's ever looked at the tolerances on them. So I've just done a chart there. There's your tolerances for the different quantities that you will take out. I think if anybody's looked in the MID, you need a degree in mathematics to even work out how they work. So problems with meter measuring systems. So clearly the issue, there's a problem with manufacturer, because quite often if you go to Tesco's or Asda or whatever, the declaration of conformity will come from Gilbarco or Tokheim or Petrotech or wherever it comes from. But quite often they will turn up on site with a declaration of conformity. You've got some questions around how are they placed on the market. I think that's an interesting question. So often the person producing the petrol pump or the bulk fuel meter is not the person placing the system on the market. I think that question has sort of been largely resolved with tankers, but it's the person that produces the lorry is the manufacturer. The person producing the meter is not the manufacturer. And then sometimes you get questions around whether the person placing it on the market has got sufficient technical expertise, because they might quite be a sort of a local fitter or something like that doing it. Any thoughts on that before we get on to WM1001? So instruments under the MIR, we've got problems with the meter measuring system. There's questions there because obviously with a petrol pump, it's not all placed on the market at the same time. It's placed on the market as bits of it break or bits of it replaced, or the garage owner can afford to change it. So we quite often get bits of it comply with different regimes. This was a real problem when MID came into force, and was going to be a bit of a problem with CE marking in UK, CA marking and all that sort of stuff. So we've got this document with WM 1001, and that's the UK government's attempt to overcome this problem. Bit of a fudge, but it works. Everybody understands that it's a bit of a fudge, and everybody tries to work with it. I think it works as well as you can be expected, but you will often find petrol pumps, some are done under the Weights and Measures Act, some are done under the MID, some are done under the MIR, and you'll find them all on the same forecourt. So petrol pumps, questions. As this is just a run through the MID, we haven't got hundreds of slides on petrol pumps. So comments, feedback, questions. What do we want to know about petrol pumps? Happy with WM 1001? Happy with STA? Happy with life?
Just about happy with life, yeah.
At least you're happy with life, if not necessarily focusing on STA or W1001. People thought about these questions on who's the manufacturer for petrol pumps?
Ian, sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
On STA? The conversion figures for STA pumps in terms of the different fuel grades, they used to be updated every year or two, and have not been updated in numerous years.
No.
Is there, first of all, any reason for that? And secondly, is there any plan to update them?
My serious answer is there any reason? No. Is there any plans to update them? Don't think so. I'm trying to think of a fatuous answer now. Yes, because they're British figures, and we didn't want European STA figures. No, I've no idea. It's just, it makes a nonsense of it.
Yeah.
It makes a nonsense of it, but they're the figures that are the advised figures. I think my feeling is if you've got anything that's likely to be close to failing due to the temperature compensation, I would just ask them to just bring it back in again, get it closer. That would be my view. Katrin?
Yeah. So who would be the manufacturer of a petrol pump?
So I'm throwing the question out there.
Okay.
Yeah, rather than necessarily giving you the answer. It's one of those slightly unresolved things.
Right. Okay.
It relates to a meter measuring system. So if you think about your local Tesco's, your meter measuring system will include the tank underground, it will include the metering bit, it will include the software bit, it will include the pipe work into the POS system, it will include any card readers, it will include anything that is elsewhere that does any price computation.
Okay.
So the issue is you will invariably get a declaration of conformity on a petrol pump, which then turns up to the site sealed and stamped, and then it's just plugged in and they do some checks on site. Now I think the checks on site should be your verification. It should be like not a two-stage verification, but a verification done in 2 stages. I can do part of it in the factory, but I have to do some of it on site. That would be my opinion. But quite often the stuff done on site is not a verification. It's like a quality control check. So my point is a question rather than an answer.
Okay. Yeah.
Somebody has to be the manufacturer and somebody has to conformity assess it. Quite often that will be Tokai, Gilbarco, Petrotech, whoever. Whether they're doing the verification connected to all the other bits of module on site, I think it's a good question. Does that help?
Yes and no.
Sorry, there's no answer.
There's no answer, basically. Yeah.
It's a question rather than an answer.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah. Are you going to poke a stick at it? Probably not. But I still think it's one of those. Oh, that's interesting. Next question. There must be more questions on petrol pumps. If there's no more questions.
Why the 100 litres limit or bottom? Because surely some of these bigger vehicles these days can start to take more than 100 litres.
So no, the 100 litres and above is your tanker.
Yeah.
100 litres and below is your petrol pump. Why back in 1230 they chose 100 litres? I don't know.
All right, okay.
I think it's an arbitrary cut-off point.
Yeah.
Because I think the problem comes on the high-speed diesels for trucks.
Right. Yeah.
So you've got a bit of an ambiguity there, haven't you? That legally they're only stamped because they can deliver less than 100 litres.
Yeah.
So interestingly, the 100 litres to 500 litres for your truck is not controlled.
Right. Yeah.
One of those things. I mean, you could just as easily take 100 litres out, and it would be fine, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And even with the high-speed diesel, only testing it up to 20 anyway, so it's kind of irrelevant.
Yes.
But that's what the numbers are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I did an exam question on the last exam about filling up boats.
Okay. Yeah.
At marinas, so that was exactly that point of the boat takes 300 litres. And the petrol pump was wrong. What could you do about it? And the point was, because it can fill less than 100 litres, it still needs to be stamped and approved.
Yeah. Okay.
Any more petrol? Go on.
Because it's the same question on the next exam.
After a while, if you read the exam enough, you'll spot the questions come up with different hats on, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other petrol pump questions? Tanker questions? AdBlue? Everybody happy with it only applies to liquid fuel? So it doesn't apply to stuff that's not liquid fuel? So MI 006, catch wires and check wires. Bizarrely, we break this down into check wires, category X, subdivides articles of different masses into 2 or more subgroups. So the easy way of thinking about that, it's the one with the flicky flacky arm. So it has a rejection mechanism that then ejects products below a point. So in the UK, check wires are covered by effectively they're used for packaged goods. But in the UK, they're not stamped and approved, so you don't need to use stamped and approved check wires. And we've got 4 different categories: X1, X2, X3, X4. Nice. And catch wires, these are the determines the mass of pre-assembled discrete loads, blocks of cheese, and may then label them, subdivided into 4 categories. Clearly, they're not the same: Y1, Y2, YA, and YB. Obvious, isn't it? If you were going to make 2 halves of the same coin, you'd give them completely different categorizations. So X3 is class 3 machines, the most common. YA is class 3 machines, the most common. YB, you might see there's some interesting things. Bin wires, so things on refuse trucks will be YB. And I've stamped things before on pardon me, diggers, so what they call front end loaders, so JCBs and things like that are YB. And then Catherine.
Yeah, so you mentioned there that check weighers are not stamped and approved
In the UK.
What about catch weighers then?
They are.
They are, okay, fine.
Yeah, but the point what you've got to draw out is often catch weighers aren't terribly common. So weigh price labelers aren't terribly common because you've got your pre-assembled discrete load. So it's for variable loads. So the scenarios that you'll find are for different loads of cheese, different weights of cheese, different blocks of chicken. I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark that when you went with Crispin, it wasn't at a DHL place, that sort of place, was it?
Royal Mail.
So the place where catch wires are becoming very, very common is parcel dispatch places.
Mm-hmm.
So they're pre-assembled discrete loads, aren't they? Your DHL Royal Mail box, they're all different in weight, and they'll be stamped or labelled with the weight.
Mm-hmm.
How many trading standards departments are regularly going into parcel dispatch places to check the machines? The silence tells me. Who's that putting their thumbs up?
We've got one in
Jim.
our area, Ian, that I was at in February.
So my point then is, how many local authorities are there in the UK?
Crispin's doing a lot of them.
Yeah,
he goes up and down the country doing all the Royal Mails, I think.
Yeah. So not many is my point. And even market surveillance, not many is my point. And how many are we? How many times you get parcel deliveries? Either you're getting them yourselves or looking out your window, and the neighbours are getting it, aren't they? So we've got one trading standards department, and I think you're right. Crispin's got the Royal Mail contract, hasn't he?
Pretty much. So
I think he goes around doing a lot of them. But there's also, that's interesting, Crispin's verifying them, isn't he?
Yeah.
I'm not sure he's doing there's no market surveillance done on them, is there?
No.
It was just to give people another example. We get a lot of catch weighers up in the fish factories up here as well.
But are they catch weighers?
Yes. Weight price labelers.
Yeah, it's a question. I live in Bedfordshire. I have literally no experience in the fishing industry. Yeah, I suppose it will be. Is that coming off the boats?
In the factories, so they process the fish and then package them up, and then they get weighed and labelled.
Wait, yeah. So there you go. There's another example. And I did also somewhere they do they weigh ice onto the boats?
Yes, there is something. I've never seen that, but
yeah. We could safely say North Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire, there's not a lot of catch wires doing ice onto boats. There you go. One of the piece of trivia. Bedfordshire, one of the few, if it's not the only, double landlocked counties that you have to travel through 2 other counties before you can get to the sea. Trivial, but true.
What's the other one?
I can't remember. I was quite old before I realised there were other counties.
I'm sat in it.
Is it?
Shropshire's landlocked, I'm pretty sure.
Well, it's definitely going to be landlocked, but have you got to go through 2 other?
Oh, 2 others, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe. Possibly.
Yeah. Not that it's
anyway.
a massive bearing on anybody's life at all, even if you live there. It's just a long way to the beach.
Yeah, it is a long way to the beach.
Yeah. So are we happy with those distinctions? Other questions? Anybody looked at check wires much? They're probably the predominant thing. Do people play with check wires?
You're going out soon to look at check wires?
I always think the issue with check wires is you quite often need to have the manufacturer in tow, because there's such sophisticated bits of machinery these days that you're going to make very little headway in testing them.
Oh, yeah.
Category Y, minimum of 10 weighings at each test load, must be completed at minimum, maximum the error change points, maximum and half belt speed, all loads within the permitted tolerance, and again applies to onboard weighing systems, so bin lorries and front end loaders. There's more of those out there than you think, the front end loaders, because if you can't afford a weighbridge in a quarry, you use a stamped front end loader. They're quite clever. They work off pneumatic pressure. So the cells, the hydraulic rams that lift the buckets, they just monitor the difference in hydraulic pressure. Normative document is R51, and there are separate test for check wires and catch wires. Category X, the check wires, pass over a prescribed number of packages as outlined in R51. Compare those weights on a comparison scale. If the instrument is below 10 kilos, there will be 60 packages. And then you work out the mean value of the error shall be less than the permitted value. Maximum standard deviation shall not be more than the permitted value. Except when you look at it, anybody looked at R51 on this? Is a lot of words, but it makes a huge amount of sense if you plow through it. You need to think about the range, the standard deviation and the range of the weights. There isn't a zone of indecision. So next time, if anybody trainees, if they've got somebody assessing their work, and they say you need to do a zone of indecision, you don't. Next category of automatic weighings is AGFIs, automatic gravimetric filling instruments. These are instruments that fill containers with a predetermined mass of product from bulk. So the easiest way to think about these is yogurt pots. That's the way I think about it. So if you've got a big cylinder of stuff and then it drops into something smaller, wine bottles, you take a number of containers and check on a comparison scale. Errors specify a maximum deviation of each fill from the mean and a preset value. So there's a lot of them. So the major manufacturer of these is a company called Kronos Richardson. And interestingly, they don't have a module D. So I don't know how many people, we got quite a few of them around here where I used to really work. We have a lot of grain merchants around here. And they had big 1/2 ton or 1 ton gravimetric filling instruments, and none of them were stamped. They would say, go and get this stamped by trading standards and then just disappear, knowing full well that in most places the trading standards were going to come nowhere near it. They're fun. Anybody looked at gravimetrics?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. If you like big industrial weighing machinery, they're great fun. Discontinuous totalizers is an automatic weighing instrument that determines the mass of a bulk product by dividing it into discrete loads. The mass of each discrete load is determined in sequence and summed. Each discrete load is then delivered to bulk. So think about these things in terms of a big hopper, and then underneath is like a shutter mechanism that opens like a trap door. So it would come from the big hopper into this kind of trap door space, weigh it, and then open it, and it will go back into a lorry or into another hopper. The point about them is they totalize. So you'll have, I don't know, if it opens and shuts 10 times, you'll know that you've distributed 10 tons into the lorry, or 100 kilos or whatever. They're not very common. They're generally very big. And it's one of the things that you quite often have to default to the manufacturer to know how the thing works. I've seen a few of them, and they're generally up very tall towers, and they're physically very hard work. They're done quite often to replace weighbridges. So if you haven't got enough space for a weighbridge, although I never understand why you wouldn't have enough space for a weighbridge if it's going into a lorry, surely you just have a weighbridge. But they're done for a replacement for weighbridges and totalize. Totalized value checks against comparison scale, maximum rate instrument, at least 5 weighing cycles. Anybody done those? Who's done some?
Seen them in operation at concrete batching plants, but never physically tested one.
Similar concrete batching plants, similar principle. I think the point about them is they're generally under contract.
Yeah.
They're generally calibrated regularly. So in terms of enforcement, you would probably go and check the calibration records.
It's like hand in the tiller.
Yeah, you would generally do that. To actually verify one or check one is, I've never checked one, that's for certain, because it's 2 or 3 days work quite often. So they're big things. So a continuous totalizer is a belt weigher. So it's the opposite of a discontinuous, in as much as a discontinuous totalizer We'll do it in discrete loads. A belt weigher is a conveyor weigher system that will just totalize the amount that goes over it. Again, they're quite clever bits of kit. They're used, where have we seen them? Fishing industry.
When you say we used to have them at Dalquandi, which was a coal mine.
Coal mines.
It was basically everything was brought out and put onto the bulk tippers and carted out to all the power stations from there.
Yeah, we used to see a few in the sand pits around here. A lot of sand pits, so they'd be there. Again, it's a very, very specific piece of equipment. If you ever need to get involved in one, you need to probably phone the manufacturer. And then railway bridges, normative document R106, must test the weigh plate with static load, calculate the weight of the wagons, compare the weight of the wagons dynamically to the static values, number of run at different speeds. It's often dependent on the equipment and the personnel. Even the standard admits that you'll take 2 or 3 days to do it, probably. David used to do them, didn't he?
Yeah, I think so. You had used to go through to Fife and do the one at power station at Long Anna.
I remember talking to David about them. So that's a run through automatic weighers. Questions, thoughts, experiences, anything to share? No? Annex MI008, Part 2, capacity serving measures. Normative document is R138, and it's called Vessels for Commercial Transactions. Limited use, as not many countries can hold capacity serving measures. It's the British Isles that control them. Volume is tested gravimetrically, so quite often you fill them up and weigh them. And then there are other criteria regarding strength and suitability. There's lots of discussion around these now, because as I was saying earlier, you go to concert venues, you go to football matches, rugby matches, anything really, and they're all cardboard measures. And there's lots of things on the market which probably shouldn't be stamped. But once one approved body, notified body, has agreed to stamp them, they're out there, aren't they? The horse has bolted. And you've got WELMAC 8.9, common approach regarding capacity serving measures. And then hopefully the next slide is dimensional measuring instruments. There's another slide missing. So part 1 here, this is clearly dropped out, and I do apologise, is what are called material measures of length, tape measures. So that's Annex MI008 Part 1. And R38 covers those, I believe. Again, there are tolerances. You compare them by putting it against the next standard up. So it amazes me with tape measures about how much effort goes into approving them, and then you buy one from B&Q that's stamped and it's about a £5. So you always never quite understand how they're made. So material measure of length, Annex MI009. So we've got 3 different types of length measuring instruments, area measuring instruments, and multi-dimensional measuring instruments. So imagine 1 dimension, 2 dimensions, and 3 dimensions. So the multi-dimensional measuring instruments are getting more and more common in the parcel force environments. Some of them are quite sophisticated with lasers and things like that. Can be very simple. They're not controlled under the MIRs, but will still be covered by Section 17 of the Weights and Measures Act if they are in use for trade. So now the most important part of it, we get to questions, and I have to talk to you about the primary authority, which is a means for business to receive assured and tailored advice on meeting environmental, health, trading standards or fire safety regulations through a single point of contact. primary authority enables businesses to form a legal partnership with one local authority, which then provides assured and tailored advice and complying with all of the legislation. And on that QR code, you can find more information. And then there's a feedback which OPSS would love you to fill in.